Good evening, Central St Martins. My name is Hallidonto. I'm a contemporary cyborg artist and I'm based in London. And I now present to you the Cyborg manifesto. The children of the 80s are the prototypes for upgraded humanity. They are the children of the digital age, children of the first generation cyborg. The concept of humanity is being transformed while postmodernism introduces a new era in art. Via computers, televisions, cartoons, and comics, my childhood was immersed in images of cyborgs, superheroes, and the machines from the land of the hyper-real. The essence of the cyborg became my own. I identified with the concept of such a being, and it has informed my work to date. Hyper-real in an unreal virtual world. Postmodern philosophy focuses heavily on the concept of the hyperreal as immortalized by Jean Baudrillard. This concept informs my research and has led me to other spheres of study and cross-referencing various genres influenced by the philosophy of the hyperreal. My work explores the contemporary inhuman human condition, and the aesthetic forms used are conceptual drawing, sculpture, video, VR, and installations. The modern world viewed through the cathode ray, digital surveillance and observations of contemporary society compelled me to explore a dystopian vision. Men are only as good as their technical developments allow them to be, George Orwell. Contemporary society explores the perversions of the media. Serial killers are glorified, news is controlled and censored. Military regimes and dictatorships prevail. The dystopian vision prevails overall. My drawings are created using a continuous line, then worked into to add flesh. The images that are created are cyborgs, reflecting the body's dystopian descent into the world of the hyperreal. The drawings have a classical style, but flow in an expressively twisted dystopian vision of contemporary society. My early work concentrated on the bare bones of the cyborg. It carries no flesh. It is the basis of my work in progress. It is naked and stark, as is the central feature in Duchamp's The Bride Stripped Bare by Her Bachelor's Even. The drawings are pure cyborg, without embellishment. They are infantile and simplistic in their appearance, but not in their construction, being drawn in one continuous line. A man who does not accept his conditions of his life sells his soul. Charles Baudelaire. From this premise, I conceived that my first cyborg would interpret the modern age as I perceived it. It would grow and evolve through time and influence. Each epoch carries with it the interpreters of that age, and it is in the French symbolist movement of painters, poets, and novelists I find particular empathy. Their dystopia is veiled in grandeur, concealing in the subject matter the notion of fear and decay, which pervades their various works. In contrast, the cyborg image openly decays as it evolves into a continuing motif in my work. My work is of its time, before its time, and ahead of its time. Thank you.
All right. You guys good? All right, so how are we doing? Wow, nothing. I got told it was an audience full of students, and they've all fallen asleep or gone to the bar. So my name is Luke Robert Mason, and firstly, I want to thank Central St Martins for hosting us. I also want to thank Ralph Barker for putting this panel together. I run an event series in London called Virtual Futures, where our aim is to bury the 20th century and begin work on the 21st. So let's begin. At first, it seems the reports of our cyborg future are somewhat greatly exaggerated. They emerge at the cross-section of several often misconceived science-fictional representations of messianic or dystopian human-machine hybrids, and the imaginative promises embodied in recent and rapid advances in the field of human-machine, human-computer, and brain-to-computer interfaces. These developments being those which could be said to offer the greatest opportunity for humanity to be extended through extraneous, non-biological digital tools. But what is a cyborg? And that's the question we're hopefully going to answer on this panel. Well, the definition of a cyborg still remains heavily grounded in the definition offered by Manfred C. Clynes and Nathan C. Klein when they coined the term in the early 1960s essay, Cyborgs and Space. For Kyles and Klein, the cyborg deliberately incorporates extraneous components, extending the self-regulatory control function of an organism in order to adapt it to new environments. Here, their concern was with altering the human body to meet the requirements of an extraterrestrial environment, and that extraterrestrial environment being of space. Now, Donna Haraway then, in a 1991 essay, The Cyborg Manifesto, revisited the figure of the cyborg as a way of understanding postmodernity. Her definition of the cyborg is fourfold: as cybernetic organism, as hybrid of machine and organism, as a creature lived in social reality, and as a creature of fiction. Although more recently Haraway has seemingly abandoned the cyborg in a move towards considering the canine and companion species, her assertion that we are all cyborgs has been co-opted in social discourse. Now, this has been most evident through the self-cyborg anthropologist Amber Case claiming that the 21st century humans' ubiquitous connection to their handheld devices makes all of us cyborgs. Here it's the smartphone that's positioned as a form of extension of the mental self, and in recognizing this relationship between the human and these tools, the image of the cyborg is elevated whilst simultaneously, to a degree, parodied. What is self-evident is expressed by Scott Bacatman's claim that the body must become a cyborg to retain its presence in the world, resituated in technological space and reconfigured in technological terms. Here, humanity's connection to their mobile devices is fostered as a way to instantaneously access the information environment on which our economic and a large degree of our social human lives increasingly depend. So we must return to Klein's original conception of the cyborg and reveal how the closed system of homeostatic conditions both ensured the survival of the human outside Earth's atmosphere, but more importantly, left man free to explore, to create, to think, and to feel. It's a consideration of what it means to think, to feel, or ultimately to be cyborg that allows us to consider a relationship that's more than just our relationship with representations of information. It allows us to have an understanding of the sorts of profound embodiments that are created by agent world circuits, thus allowing the cyborg to open itself up to the essence of technology. So, to understand the concept of the cyborg, we must develop a deep relation to it that encourages deep incorporation, self-exploration, and perhaps even artistic exploration. We must come to know of the cyborg by understanding the concept in much the same way that a helicopter pilot attached to their aircraft through high-tech tactile flight suits interfaces are able to feel the aircraft as an extension of their being and work in symbiosis with it. So to explore how we might recognize the cyborg for the 21st century, please put your hands together and join me in welcoming our incredible panelists. So I want to kick off with Graham Hallidonto. Now, Graham, you gave us this wonderful manifesto towards the cyborg, and your art really tries to reimagine this cyborg aesthetic. Your work isn't kitsch. Instead, you're trying to do something slightly different, which isn't conjuring the normal notions of the cyborg being this Terminator robotic figure.
I thought you were going to leave that out. Yeah, I think that as you're saying, it was for me when coming to the idea of creating this cyborg. Like as a child, I grew up with this kind of idea of dystopia from the media I was consuming. So everything I used to watch was like Transformers and all these kind of TV programs. So, and as you pointed out about the idea of being kitsch, it was like, how do I reimagine this concept and how do I reimagine this being within fine art, and bring it to a new aesthetic and try and, as you say, reappropriate it and reimagine it via, the way how I construct this being and staying away from kind of the cliches of the cyborg image. So, I kind of got a fascination with kind of religious iconography because I see like the cyborg as very much, dystopian divine as opposed to being divine. So for me, it was kind of like trying to explore that, and by using the one line, giving birth to this organism of chance. Like it doesn't have a set trajectory. So I would say that's kind of the path I was going with the cyborg for me.
Now, Warren Ellis, you're a writer, an author, famously have written many, many comic books, and it could be argued that you've done the most damage when it comes to creating visions of the future. It's you we have to blame for not getting the future we wanted. So where is this entire cyborg enterprise today? I mean, little Graham grew up with the cyborg and comic books, and with you. Where are we today, Warren?
This is the most recent in a long line of, why is everything all your fault, Warren? We blame you for everything. I mean, I thought this had passed after Trump got made president and people cited my graphic novel Transmetropolitan at me and said, why did you predict this? Why did this happen? It's your fault, isn't it? Where are we with the cyborg? In popular culture, oddly, the idea seems to have gone away a little bit. There is not a great deal of conversation right now about the confluence between the mechanically technological and the human organic. The conversation seems to be these days all about artificial intelligence and people's entirely fictional interpretations of what artificial intelligence means. Possibly because either we're uncomfortable with the idea that we are now attached to our devices, or we've simply become completely comfortable with being attached to our devices, so we don't feel the need to interrogate that in fiction so much anymore.
I want to turn to you, Jamie. So, Dr. Jamie Brassett, you run the Cultural and Enterprise program here at CSM, and to a degree, all right. Well, that's what's on the website. So, whoever's managing the CSM website, please update Jamie's bio. But I just want to ask you about the cyborg historically. So, the cyborg could be said to have a long history, not just back to the 1960s essays that were mentioned in the introduction, but all the way back to how we've cognized and recognized the human in relationship to technology throughout the ages.
Well, I'm a philosopher, really, not a historian either. So I don't know where you got that bit. I think I would have agreed with Warren that I'm not too interested in the cyborg anymore. Until about say 3-4 years ago, I'd pretty much spent the end of the 80s when I was doing my PhD up through the 90s interested in the cyborg, and I think your characterization via Kleins and Klein is a fair one. And then in early 2000s, I was a little bit sort of bored that it didn't happen, and I don't blame Warren for that. Finally. The work that I'd done was, especially in the 90s, was in critically interrogating the body modification movement, which saw itself as modern primitives, and I saw them rather as primitive cyborgs, changing and opening the body up to different influences, different types of existence. And I got bored with that in about 2000, until a couple of years ago when an old student of mine, who'd also got a PhD in biophysics in the 90s, came to me from Microsoft. And we did some work together on my course. And he said, Jamie, all that cyborg stuff is coming back. And I said, I've been thinking that too, Anton. It's big data. Big data is making this issue of the cyborg much more prevalent again. And this is because, maybe because of the technologies that Warren just mentioned, that much of what constitutes us is now redistributed and even owned by others that totally exceeds our bodies. And because of that, we really need to critically consider what we have become and what we might become as a consequence of our intimate relationships with technology. And I would say that these intimate relationships with technology are not necessarily machinic or metal, but anything that's constituted outside of us.
But do they still qualify as tools? Because a lot of the time I find myself wanting to contextualize the cyborg as simply radical tool use. We're a tool-using species. When we talk about technology, we're just talking about tool use. And on a very basic level, we've all been cyborgs for a very long time. Check out the artificial skin I wear on my feet. I attach artificial skin to my feet so that I can walk longer distances without injury. I wear a technology to regulate my temperature. We're a tool-using species. What you're talking about with big data and the data trails we exude like worm trails as we move around the world, do you think that qualifies as tools? And therefore, have we actually produced tools we don't have the agency to use?
I think the issue of the tool is a really interesting and important one. I would consider much more about a relationship with a machine, whereas a tool needs energy given to it to make it do something. A machine doesn't. And I think that what we are becoming is we are being crossed over by a machinic species, which may be yet to come, but we are already a hybrid form of that, and I think it's beyond.
I think we are a hybrid form. This is where I got interested in body modification. The fact that the people were extending radical tool use into a deeper hybridization towards the cyborg, if you want to use that word.
Well, I think the machinic is beyond the tool, and we are opening up, or have been opened up to the machine in such a way that we are being changed by it.
Or what if we are? I mean, in the old terminology, what if we're just the reproductive organs of machines?
Yes. Yeah. No, I think we are. Like a bee in an orchid.
It's all about the tool. That's kind of when I was interpreting the cyborg image myself, that I kind of went archaic. I went backwards.
Yeah,
because going through art school and wherever everything was coming conceptual was just it was more literary than it was actually image producing. So it was all about words, semantics, everything else. So for me, I want to go back and strip it right back to pencil, and then going through that journey, but now VR has opened up a new experience for me to take my drawing straight from the two-dimensional plane into a three-dimensional space, and to create sculptures via this.
Yeah, and that was for me. That was the other half of the body modification movement, because half of it is radical tool use, and half of it is presentation and performance and illustration of what could be next.
Indeed, and it's a prothesis, isn't it? Because everything is a prothesis that way. So therefore, the VR has opened up to. Like as McLuhan has said, as well, it's like bringing using yesterday's tools for future stuff, but using today's tools and bring it into the future and bringing my concept into where it should be. Just kind of ironic coming from me in a way, but it helps.
And
exactly.
Well, when we hear this term cyborg artist, we think of radical interventions into the body, like Warren's mentioning, like
Stellark.
So the performance
Yeah.
artist Stellark, who has the ear
Or
surgically implanted into his arm, or Orlan, who's surgically manipulated her face as a performative promise to the future, as a potential possibility. And Graham, I wonder why you've gone, I don't want to say low tech, but you've gone back to the canvas being quite literally a canvas. The canvas for you as a cyborg artist isn't the body.
Yeah, I mean, I think that was kind of my revolution against, and because I don't think the technology for a while was good enough, to produce the images. I found that the images were, not interesting. They were kind of become very basic and, very cliche for me. So, for now, VR, because I draw on continuous lines, it's a very sculptural process, When I create these beings, it's a sculptural process. I'm building an organism, so I really want to, that gives me the opportunity to build that organism and to actually create it within space, and with using 3D printing gives it a tangibility, so I want to take it that way, because now it's like I still use, paper or wood or whatever, but for me, like, VR is definitely the embodiment for my work in a post-human context, for sure,
And Warren, you use, again, I don't want to say arcane form of technology, but writing, the ability for writing to conjure imageries and performative promises to the future. I want to ask, is that your form of body modification, or in fact culture modification? Are you attempting to proffer something out that you would like to see rendered in the real?
No. I've got to say no. I'm coming in from griot culture, essentially. I bring you stories of the outside world in return for some food and somewhere warm to sleep. The stories don't necessarily have to be true. The stories can simply be suggestions of what's coming rather than what's happened. But no, from storytelling culture, I'm entirely outside the praxis.
One thing I found fascinating about Warren's work as a teenager growing up for me about Transmetropolitan is that, in reference to my cyborg image, because a bit of homage to Warren there, is that, that like the cyborg will evolve in my work through the technology that I use. And like Transmetropolitan does that so well that Spider Jerusalem he ages throughout the process. So I'd like to, keep doing that with my work, going from archaic now to VR and whatever's next,
And Jamie, I want to talk a bit about artists practicing a cyborg practice. Now, we see multiple different extremes of how students and artists engage with this notion of the cyborg. As someone who is working with the next generation of artists, is there a degree to which you have to advise, whether ethically or pragmatically, about some of the interventions that individuals who are interested in this field come to you with?
Well, I would say that the ethics are all important, but I align my definition of ethics is a bit of a left field one. So I would align ethics with ontology as Spinoza does. So what Spinoza would do would say that we are constituted according to the ways in which we are affected or affect others. And the measure of that affect is a measure of ethics. So the ethics becomes an ontology at the same time as ontology becomes ethical. So to consider what one creates in the world, in order to try to understand how it might affect others, and therefore how one is constituted through that relationship of affect, is utterly ethical. So I engage with the technologies I need to create whatever it is I'm in the process of creating, and it could be a piece of art, it could be a piece of writing, it could be an organization or a process. And whilst that thing may not have come to being without me, my being as a creator would not have existed without that process and without that thing. So there's a mutuality of the relationship. So if we're thinking how that might impact an understanding of a cyborg, one could say that the sense of cyborgness stands outside of either myself or the product or the piece of art, and yet there's some way of understanding or considering these things in a relationship with each other that are beyond both, that exceed both, but is utterly necessary to have both.
See, I'm a terrible person. Haven't you always wanted to see an unethical cyborg Olympics?
Well, yes.
Just let people build what they want onto themselves and watch them explode in the stadium. Can you imagine what that would have been like in the 80s? Big Russian guys with petrol-powered legs.
Segways.
Yes. What? Yeah. Americans who have just attached 18 wheels to themselves to do a marathon. Why not?
There's good precedents for that. So Dr. Andy Meir at University of Salford has argued, why don't we have a fully enabled Olympics and allow individuals to manipulate their body in whatever way we see fit? Wouldn't we rather see someone run the 100 meters in 3 seconds flat than 13 seconds flat? And I suppose to what you were trying to say, Warren, is like, how far do we go and where do we limit ourselves? Because if technology
and then the question becomes, are you really going to limit tool use in a tool-using species?
Exactly.
And of course you're not. Because where do you draw the line? I see a lot of people here who are enjoying technologically augmented eyesight.
Especially her down there. She's iPhoned right up. I know.
Yeah. There's probably a big discussion to be had about, where do you draw a line with tool use and tool development? Maybe you don't.
No. Well, is there a limitation on the human body? So we start with something pre-given, this biological breathing human entity, and then we're essentially scaffolding technology onto it. And our relationship isn't, as Andy Clark calls it, profoundly embodied, because profound embodiment with technology requires durations. The difference between someone like Stellark, who had the ear surgically implanted into his arm and everyone went, wow, what can it do? And he goes, nothing, but it bloody hurts every time I take a shower. Versus someone like Neil Harbisson, the colorblind artist who's had the antenna surgically implanted into his head, lived with it for 10 years, and now has this profound embodiment whereby he dreams in sonochromatic dreams. Do you think there's
Steve Mann, who of course had the glasses and the location kit and all, and the minute someone made him take it off at an airport, he fell over.
So my question is there a point at which the body can't take any more technology?
If we don't test the boundaries, we'll never find out.
Yeah, exactly.
So we should take a proactionary response to some of this technology. There should be blood spill, and look, if you died in the process, then you died in the service of the future of humanity. Is that what you guys are arguing?
War's always helped to do that, hasn't it?
People die in exploration all the time.
So we should allow it to be a thing that, we sign kids up at 21 years old and go, look, we're going to try this very experimental drug or very experimental technology on you. No.
It's a form of eugenics.
Are we assuming that there is a thing that is a body? That there is an inside and an outside? And if there isn't an inside and an outside, then the body is already extending into its surroundings. There certainly isn't a thing that is human.
No.
Because much of what we are is constituted by the non-human organisms. We have already interfaced, many of us have already interfaced with technologically produced organic material in order to make ourselves function in the world in ways at which we never could. So with inoculations from birth and so on. So that there's some of this is moot actually, and what we maybe are considering what are the not where are the edges, but what are the potentials? Not what are the limits, but how far might that line go of experience or activity, And if we smash into a brick wall, then so what?
Should that be a very... there we go. Should that be a very individualist exploration? So you talk about the body mod guys. That works for them. The idea to have RFID tags under their skin, or to have big pieces of machinery surgically implanted under their skin with lights, if you're grindhouse wetware, that's a very specific aesthetic desire for those individuals, and we should allow them to be the
Think of it
pioneers.
in terms of the history of flight.
Uh-huh.
Where hundreds of people created absolutely ridiculous flying machines, most of which killed the operators before you got to the Wright brothers and Kitty Hawk.
So we should celebrate these individuals as being the pioneers,
And
the
also
people
film
taking the
them.
reactionary approach.
Absolutely film them as well, yes.
They do a good job at filming.
I mean, that's a
filming
YouTube
themselves.
channel I would absolutely enjoy.
Grinders
Cyborg
into the
failures.
ground. Cyborg fails. So, in that case, should then the cyborg be less, and especially the aesthetics of the cyborg, less about thinking about that kind of Terminator vision, the collaboration between silicon and the body, and more nuanced with regards to how we think about our relationship with the world that we want as individuals? In other words, should we allow each and every person to have their own cyborg experience for whatever that means for them? In other words, should we embrace, encourage, and allow people to engineer differentiated forms of being human? And if so, how?
Well, I'm not sure that we have a say. I think it's already happening. The ethical question, as we were considering earlier, is what are the directions in which you point this thing, and the construction of the possibilities of what we might become are not always entirely in our hands. And the issue then becomes the ways in which politics and ethics come together. So whom do we allow to construct us as data, for example? Whom do we allow to run in an Olympics, augmented through nutrition and the best coaches that money can buy, but not through drugs? I mean,
And I'm reminded of something someone threw at me a few years ago about the legal frameworks around this. I met a lawyer at a Google thing in Portland about 3 years ago who had just had a pacemaker put in, and the pacemaker had a Bluetooth radio in it, so her consultant could get data out of the pacemaker. And then she discovered it was hackable by anybody with a phone. And there was no legal framework behind that. So literally someone could murder this woman in a car park with a Samsung.
I'd probably do it with my hearing aid. Log on to Halliday's head,
Well, there's a difference here between the folks who are designing this stuff for themselves and sharing their feedback with
It's a
just not
different
bring up
thing, but
kind
it
of a
goes
form
to
of
the same
eugenics.
point, which is discovering these things before there's a protective framework around them. It is, I mean, I'm doing the jokes, but there are broader questions about the protections and the ability to make choices, or even the ability to realise when the choices have been taken away from you.
Yeah, right. Absolutely.
Graham keeps shouting eugenics at me, so I don't need to know. I don't need to know what he means by that.
Listen!
It's not the first time, I'm sure.
Just in terms like the cyborg as well, with a eugenic consciousness to make it better, but also the abilities for the governments to track you, and that you're like social currency, as in going back to big data, like people are, well, why are we not all getting paid, for all the information we put in, so the more that you augment the body, the more that you become part of a system, a bigger system, but also you're tracked, and it's, from, if you want to buy a house or whatever, this is big questions. Like blockchain kind of reminds me of Ghost in the Shell, it's kind of like a currency born in the internet, but nobody can control it, so how is that going to incorporate into the body, and how do we do with finance? in a eugenical kind of question, if that makes sense.
Do we have to be careful that when we talk about the cyborg, we're not fetishizing technology? So you see individuals,
I'm a bit
a
afraid
friend
of
of
it.
ours, Nigel Ackland, with a bionic prosthetic limb, everybody runs up to him and goes, "Oh my God, I want one." And he looks at them and goes, "Well, look, it's the most exclusive club in the world, and it's going to cost you an arm or a leg to get in, so you're going to have to pick." Now, we see these devices used to help, for want of a better word, disabled individuals become able-bodied again, and we see them as something desirous.
Yeah.
Should we be very critical and very cautious about being excited about this idea of putting lights in your skin and giving yourself cybernetic
it's like plastic
enhancement?
surgery. Plastic surgery in the 90s was that's a similar thing, isn't it? To make yourself look beautiful, It's like,
There's a difference. There's a difference between a prosthesis and an augmentation. A guy who's got a prosthetic arm. This arm is not better. It's a partial replacement. We need to understand that is not an enhancement. That is not an augmentation. No. That is trying to return someone to full function, and it's not all the way there yet. So it might look cool. And possibly easier to clean, or less likely to wear out, but it's not necessarily an enhancement. There needs to be some interrogation of what these things actually do and whether they enhance the function that we're born with, if you like.
Now, these amputees argue that prosthetic envy should be very, very carefully considered.
Yeah.
Us able-bodied individuals, you shouldn't be
the carbon lower legs look great, and they do extend function in some ways, but there's no feeling.
Well, this is where the disconnect comes between the cyborg as an aesthetic figure and a cyborg as a functional figure that works in everyday life. But Jamie, very, very quickly, I want to return to that idea of fetishizing technology and how we temper that natural desire to do so.
Well, I would say that we can't, because we are already encountering, and we have already encountered the technological. Our bodies are utterly technologized, utterly already, and there are probably a few people on the planet who might be considered. I don't know, baseline human or something, I don't know what you might call it. But certainly most of us in the developed world are not. We've all been changed. We've all been augmented. We all operate better because of our engagements and intimate interactions with the technological than we would had we not. So we're already there. So what your question is which sort of constructions do we allow or not? Do I fetishize somebody with a cool-looking prosthesis? There are some people who see themselves as one-legged people trapped in a two-legged person's body anyway, and that's not through fetishizing a prosthesis. This is, and this isn't an illness. This is no different than being a female trapped in a male body. I mean, this isn't necessarily fetishization. It's just
dysmorphia,
morphing or morphine.
Dysmorphia.
Oh, dysmorphia. Yeah.
Well, in that case, should the cyborg be less about a celebration of technology and more about the celebration of difference, the ability to have multiple different representations of bodies? How do we best present that? And Graham, perhaps I want to go back to your aesthetics and talk about how that's been morphed and changed through translating mediums. So you started with the single line, and now you're moving and morphing into VR. Was that a fetishization of VR as the extension of your work, or is there something more nuanced happening with that process of translation?
I think there's kind of multiple levels as well. Just I want to evolve, kind of in prostheses, that definitely to extend, my aesthetic output into a different sphere, you know, and especially for a sculptural kind of level for me. But I mean, the cyborg image for me is, you know, relates back to my childhood. You know, it was kind of, I was obsessed with this image of this being, and it's like what I watched was quite, I would say, quite traumatic for me. You know, I was kind of obsessed by this emergence of metamorphosis. For me, it's more of a metamorphosis. It's like, how far do we go until we're gone? You know, until there's no human left. You know, so for me, it's kind of could be a fetishization about it, possibly. So I mean, yeah, that's kind of the way I'm going with my work. Yeah.
Cool. All right. So we have some time for audience questions, and I think Ralph, you have a mic. So if anybody has a burning question, please let us know. We've answered everything. CSM, home of curious minds and imaginations, but 0 questions.
No, I think they're just ready for us to go.
There we go.
Whoa.
Feedback.
Something about dating apps. You're looking for Tinder advice. That's all.
Networked relationships is a extension of a cyborg experience. Is that where you're going? Yeah. Yes and no. I mean, it applies in that there is a basic human experience that has just become bigger and bigger through digitally networked communications. But we are just talking about communications. There was a time when drums were used to tell people to come home at night. That was hyper-local communication between neighbours. And now we have apps for that, as the old saw goes. What fascinates me about digitally networked communications is they are absolutely the small scale, just writ incredibly large. The intent hasn't changed, just the spread. But I think maybe Jamie's got another angle on that.
I'm really interested in. I really caught your dating app. You mentioned dating app, and thinking about fetishization and thinking of the application of a desirous energy to something where, quotes, it shouldn't otherwise go. And I think that we have probably always annexed technology for either sexual or other desirous practices. And it may be that many of those have driven innovation in technologies than they in places where they wouldn't otherwise have
in the last
gone.
50 years, porn has probably driven more technological innovation than banking.
Yeah. I think that's probably true. And what do we attach our desires to or through? And there's no reason why it shouldn't be a prosthetic or or a smartphone or whatever.
Well, talking of deviation driving innovation, Dr. Trudy Barber, who I love introducing as the UK's leading cyber expert, but also a professor at Portsmouth University.
Hello. I'm really fascinated by what you're saying, and really fascinated coming back to my old alma mater here, where I got my original degree, where I did one of the earliest virtual sex environments. And when I did my PhD, I looked at ideas of how technology creates arousal that also creates different forms of innovation and creativity. And I'm really interested to see how you're discussing this kind of cyclical, the thoughts that keep coming back. And it rolls down to, at the end of the day, what turns us on with our technology and what gets us to be really inventive with the technology, and how do we equate our cyborgian heritage with our sexual behavior and our fetishizing and our love of creativity. So I just want to know what are your points of view on that, that what turns you on, makes you creative in this context?
I have to do it. It's I have to create. I mean, I have this image in my head. I cannot get out of my head, and I just have to, put pen to paper. It is kind of, it's like getting horny. For me, it's like I have to paint. I have to do this, and I think I'd say that's how I feel about art for me. It's like, and I think that man always puts through his desire to procreate within technology and within the organic, and create this memory, because this is making memories. It's making your memory tangible. So it's like, for me, that is, the legacy for me is to make my image a tangible thing that you can experience and I can experience.
Well, Jamie's mind has gone out somewhere entirely.
I would imagine that probably one of the most originary characterizations of creativity is sexual, and I can't imagine why we would not attach sexual desire to any type of creativity. I can't see. I think all producing something new out of nothing is easily desirous. I mean, it's a no-brainer for me.
Yeah,
I'm with you on that.
Yeah, definitely. I totally agree.
I don't remember what sex is. I'm a professional writer. I work for Food and Water.
You got that up? You got that up that you mentioned?
All right, okay. Any other questions?
Moving on.
I'm glad to hear... Hi there. I'm another graduate of Applied Imagination, and I can't stop asking questions. It was great to hear you mention augmentation for people who need help to become what we consider human. But I'd like to challenge the panel of augmentations that could actually make us more human, not more cyborg, but actually help us discover more about ourselves, how we work, how we relate to other people, how our minds and our bodies actually interface, and to actually connect more to the world around us. Drones are giving us the most amazing picture of how we're affecting the planet and how we could be using our resources more wisely. So I challenge you for this. Where can humanity, actual human beings, be taken by a cyborg future?
There's a theory that the imagery you see in a DMT flash is actually you being able to see your own neurons firing. That would fascinate me. If that could be technologized and I could actually see visualizations of my own brain working, oh yeah, I'll be up for that.
Well, the technology's there, it's called DMT, but... All right. Well, if you want some, that bloke over there might have some.
I'm not up for the throwing up. Yeah, I'm sorry. Any cyborg augmentation that involves me puking in a bucket for 30 minutes, screw you, pal.
Taxi.
Graham, to that question.
Well, I think, in terms of that question about being more human, it's like, for me, and I think of the organisation of charities, for some reason. It's like about redistribution, like not just about wealth, but actually being empathetic about what's going on to people in the world. It sounds a bit cliche, like hi, I'm Miss World, but I think if you can embody that and actually distribute that in a positive way, in a good way it works. That's what I would go for.
Essentially,
That's what I would like.
Isn't that essentially what travel does for you?
Oh no, that's not finding myself.
Right.
And
in a way, yeah.
And Jamie, any existential angst you just want to get out in the last 10 minutes of this panel?
I'm not convinced by that there is such a thing called the human. Anyway, it's a complete myth, and probably there's much more. Yet there's probably much more that we have still to experience. Much more potential that we have to deliver than what we have ever delivered so far. So maybe if you mean by that that technology can help us do that, then I would say yes. But I think it's certainly beyond anything to do with human.
Time for one more question. Yep.
Hi, firstly, thank you very much for the discussion. It was very insightful. I couldn't help but notice there's something missing on this panel, which is a female panelist. And so my question was, is there an underrepresentation of women in this field? Or could you simply not find a female panelist? Thank you.
Well, Jamie is representative of CSM. Or should we look at Ralph? Although we do have, the two individuals coming next are incredible female artists doing incredible work. So there's a split across this, and I feel there has been an attempt to curate it with some gender neutral elements, but that is a good question. Why is it a lot of, with no offence, why is it a lot of bald old white guys talking about?
I was going to say, I didn't have time to do the joke about here's three bald old white guys to tell you about the future.
Two old ones and one not so old.
All right. One last question.
No, there are many women who are involved in investigating this theoretically, and have been definitely since the 1980s, if not before. It's an area that is hugely represented by women theorists and academics.
Yeah, most of the people I'm not part of the field, but most of the people I know working in this field are women, and I think the panel just shook out this way. It's not. I don't think it's representative of the field itself.
No, definitely not. Definitely not.
And one last question. Gentleman here, come to you. There's a limit to the length of that, so you're going to have to come to me now. This is my...
Is it possible for a cyborg to give birth to another cyborg, hypothetically?
I think there's one for Warren.
Oh, thank you. Is it possible for a cyborg to give birth to a cyborg? So we're talking about a hybrid being who is both organic and mechanical, giving birth to something that is also organic and mechanical. Hypothetically, sure. Yeah. Don't ask me how. That's not something I could immediately draw a blueprint out of. Hypothetically, I don't see why that would not be possible at some point in the future, which is the bullshit answer, because almost anything's going to be possible in the future, provided we all live long enough to get there. I mean, there's the cyborg augmentation I'd like, not dying.
Yeah, and I kind of within some of my paintings as well, I do explore the concept of birth, with a lot of cyborgs actually giving birth to these organisms. So, definitely, I think there's potential for that. I've got this idea about nanomachines, like organic and nanomachines mixed together, which would be able to make this offspring. That's my hypothesis.
And I suppose my last question to the panel, and Warren's already hinted it to some degree, is what sort of desirous vision for the future human, or indeed for yourself, do you personally want? And I'm going to kick off with Jamie.
Well, I think I would like to have as much of me spread out over as much of the world and cosmos as possible.
And Warren?
No, I mean, that sounds great, but I'm going to settle for just not dying.
Living forever. And Graham?
I kind of like the idea of death. I don't want to live forever.
Yeah, I'm with you, mate. 68
Quitter.
power years, and then we're off.
Nah.
Quitters.
So I hope we've left you with plenty to think about. I want to thank Central St. Martin's for hosting us, and I want to end how I end at least every single panel of Virtual Futures, which is with a warning, and it's a warning about the future, because the future is always virtual, and some things that may seem imminent or inevitable never actually happen. Fortunately, our ability to survive the future isn't predicated on our capacity for prediction, although, and on those much more rare occasions, something remarkable does happen when you stare the future deep in the eyes and challenge everything it seems to promise. I hope you feel you've done that this evening. The rest of the festival is now open. Please join me in thanking these incredible panelists.